Hello, welcome to this week's Bible study. We're looking at Daniel chapter 11 verse 36 up to chapter 12 verse 3. In chapter 11 so far, the angel has described how the Jews will be caught in the middle of the conflicts between their powerful neighbours for a long time, and then they will suffer a short time of intense persecution under the king Antiochus Epiphanes. In verse 35, the angel mentions the end of the time of persecution, and then it's like he says, talking about the end times, the king will do as he pleases. This is another king at another time. How do we know this? Well, the description doesn't fit Antiochus Epiphanes. And as we go on reading through this passage, it becomes clear that the angel is talking about a later time, the time of the very end. In many ways, this king was like Antiochus Epiphanes, or will be like him. This king has no respect for any other religion, just claims that he is the greatest one. It's all about him. He is a king who escalates conflicts, who spends everything on being the strongest and defeating all opposition. When Jesus' followers asked him about the end times, about the end of the world, Jesus reminded them of Daniel's visions. It is like Daniel's vision of what will happen to his people foreshadows what will happen to the people of God near the end of the world. A long, stormy history, with wars, with the fear of wars, with famines and earthquakes, with trouble and persecution for followers of Jesus, will be followed by a much shorter time of intense persecution and suffering. During this time, God's people will be so oppressed that it will seem like no one could survive. I remember my dad telling me about his experiences in the Second World War. He was the gunner in a tank. He described how the Allied forces would bombard the area ahead of them. They would throw everything at it until it was impossible to see how anyone could survive. Then they moved forward, and there were the Germans ready to meet them. I think that's what Daniel's vision is saying here. Satan will throw everything at the people of God. Every power that opposes God will bombard his people until it seems impossible that any of them can still be faithful. And yet, there they are, ready, faithful, waiting for Jesus to come again. In Matthew chapter 24, Jesus says that wickedness will increase, false prophets will deceive, and the love of many will grow cold. But the one who endures to the end will be saved. Many times the New Testament calls for endurance. Ephesians 6 verse 13 says, "Put on every piece of God's armour, so you will be able to resist the enemy in the time of evil. Then, after the battle, you will be standing firm." Well, we might not be here to live through this end time of persecution, but life throws a lot at us anyway. And for those of us who are getting older, life does not promise to get easier. So, what does it mean to be still standing? It means still having a heart full of love for God. It's all too easy to let our love grow cold. We have to intentionally protect and grow our relationship with God. It means to still be trusting, still hoping, still obeying and living God's way, still working at God's purpose and caring for people. Some of you have suffered, are suffering much more than I ever have. It must feel like life has thrown everything at you, and yet here you are, still standing, with your heart full of love for Jesus, with compassion for others, and with a faith that clings on to Jesus for dear life. And every one of God's people will be rescued. Revelation also talks about a book with names in, the Book of Life, like a birth register of all who are born into God's family, each one known and precious. Jesus calls it being born again into God's family, and all of them will be rescued, no one lost. And now we see clearly that the angel is talking about the end, when the dead are raised. Then the judgment. There are two destinies: everlasting life or shame and disgrace. Destiny is not something that just happens to you. Destiny is a choice. Life would be pretty meaningless otherwise. The wise will shine bright as the sky. Those who help many people to be right with God will shine like the stars forever. Philippians 2 verse 15 tells us that we live in a world where many people turn away from God, but that we can be like stars and bring light into dark places. Wouldn't you just love to shine like a star in dark places, bringing the light of God's love, the good news about Jesus, and helping people to know Jesus? Well, thank you for listening. Bye.